Can I remind members that the meeting will be recorded? I would ask members to note that all mobile phones must be switched off as they interfere with the recording. And can I ensure that also where there is any interest that needs to be declared to do so during the course of the meeting? Apologies. I've received no apologies for the meeting today, and there's no matters arising, and I would suggest that we move straight to the business of the meeting today. The clerk's cover note is at pages 5 to 7, and in your papers you'll find copies of the letters sent to the Minister and the Department, and a copy of the latest Department press release and transcripts from the urgent oral question to the Minister and the Minister's interview on Radio Ulster are also included in the Departmental correspondence on the June monitoring round. In the tabled items we have correspondence from the Minister, from a teacher who has been affected by the school redundancy issue and from a concerned parent. Can I welcome to the committee this afternoon Mr Trevor Connolly, who is the Director of Finance at the Department, Laverne Montgomery, who is the Director of Workforce Development at the Department, and Mr John Mason, who is Head of Human Resources at the SEELB. And you're very welcome. Thank you for coming and being with us here this afternoon. Trevor, I know that you're well aware of the issue that's in front of us today. Obviously, we have and remain seriously concerned about the way in which this matter has been handled, the way in which it has left some teachers absolutely devastated, and it seems as though we have only had a partial resolution to this issue, and obviously we want to explore a number of things with you today. So thank you for coming, and I'll ask you, either you or yourself or Laverne, to make a few comments, and then we'll have questions from members. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee this afternoon. I have been asked to explain the timeline for the decisions in respect of redundancies in 2014-15, the application of the relevant selection criteria, the status of the 167 teaching redundancy applications, and the timeline for final decisions. I'll address each of these matters in turn, and my colleagues, John Mason, Head of Human Resources from the South Eastern Education and Library Board, and Trevor Connolly, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have as a result of my briefing. Chair, I fully appreciate the committee's concerns in respect of the funding of planned teacher redundancies. In response, I think it would be important to begin with the strategic context. In 2011, the Minister inherited a very challenging education budget position. And Chair, in response to your urgent oral last week, the Minister recognised that for the education sector to live within this very constrained financial position over the 2011-15 budget period would require a strategic cost reduction programme to be implemented. The Minister then had set aside funding from within his own resource to enable this to happen. And in the last 2 financial years, over 950 teachers have gone under redundancy at a cost of over £58 million. Specifically, Chair, regarding the timeline for the redundancy process for 2014-15, a commissioning note for the teacher redundancy process was issued to the funding authorities and CCMS on the 10th of February 2014. This commissioning note outlined the process to be followed and the criteria against which the applications should be assessed. It was made clear at that point that funding would only be available where all the following criteria were met. The payback period is clearly demonstrable, that is up to 2 years for school-based teaching staff. that it is a bona fide redundancy, which means that the post is being suppressed and is not to be filled at a later stage. That there will be a genuine reduction in full-time equivalent posts, again, not to be increased at a later date. What that means is that the overall full-time equivalent for the school decreases directly in line with the number or numbers of posts declared redundant, and that the full-time equivalent will not be increased at a later date without the employing authority and departmental approval. And the fourth criteria, as this is a cost reduction exercise, that posts declared redundant are within schools managing a challenging financial position, as evidenced in the budget element of their school development plans. The funding authorities and CCMS were required to carry out a due diligence review regarding the criteria. Once satisfied that all the criteria had been met, assurance statements were to be completed at both school level and funding/employing authority level. Funding authorities and CCMS were advised that all relevant documentation was to be submitted to the Department by the 16th of April 2014, with offers to be made and accepted where possible, and appropriate formal notice given to individuals subject to departmental approval by the 30th of April 2014. The reason that this was stated as where possible was in recognition that the transfer redundancy process would not necessarily be completed by the 30th of April. The 30th of April was a key date because teachers' terms and conditions state that they must be given 4 months' notification over the summer period. That notice was subject to departmental approval. The commissioning note was clear in stating that the department may not be in a position to fund all identified redundancies due to budget pressures. The final decision would therefore depend on the number of redundancies and the available budget. The Accounting Officer assurance statement that the relevant Chief Executive Officer of, say, the Education and Library Board or CCMS was to sign stated the following: I have carried out due diligence and am content with the propriety of these redundancy proposals and can confirm that no commitments or assurances have been given to staff in respect of this scheme prior to receipt of the necessary approvals. The Chair of the Board of Governors of each school submitting an application was also required to complete an assurance statement, which again stated, I have carried out due diligence and am content with the propriety of these redundancy proposals and can confirm that no commitments or assurances have been given to staff in respect of this scheme prior to the receipt of necessary approvals. 167 cost reduction teaching redundancy applications were received by the Department during April 2014. Each application was assessed against the 4 criteria, and during May 2014 there was ongoing correspondence between the Department and the funding authorities and CCMS to ensure all relevant information and documentation was available for assessment. On the 28th of May 2014, the Department wrote to the funding authorities and CCMS advising that the Department was actively considering the proposals submitted in accordance with the criteria to be applied. At that stage, the Department identified the proposals which were deemed not to have met all 4 criteria. Each application was listed with the reason identified as to why it was deemed not to have met the criteria. Funding authorities and CCMS were advised that if they considered the Department's application of the criteria to have been incorrect, for them to provide documentary evidence to further support the application to the Department by the 2nd of June 2014. They were further advised that the other applications which were made and not referred to in this letter remained under active consideration. Each of the funding authorities and CCMS submitted further documentary evidence, which was in turn assessed against the criteria. The outcome of this process was communicated to the Minister on the 17th of June 2014, and the Minister decided on the 19th of June 2014 to set aside funding to meet the costs of those posts redundant as a result of a school closure or amalgamation at 31st of August 2014. This accounts for 46 out of the 167 teaching redundancy applications. The Minister, in the Assembly on Tuesday the 24th of June 2014, highlighted that he would review his budget further to determine whether he could identify the funding required in order to approve 30 further teaching redundancies. The Minister subsequently reprioritised funding to address this issue and announced on Thursday the 26th of June 2014 that these 30 further teaching redundancy applications have now been approved and funded. Chair, I can advise that 76 teaching redundancy applications which have been approved will mean that those individuals involved will leave their posts on the 31st of August 2014. The remaining teacher redundancy applications, of which there are 91, which have not been approved at this stage, are currently undergoing further scrutiny to determine which, if any, may be deemed to meet the criteria. The outcome of this process will be communicated to funding authorities and CCMS as early as possible. Chair, I trust that I've addressed the matters which you had asked for briefing on today, and as I indicated at the outset, both myself and my colleagues are happy to answer any questions in relation to this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laverne. And despite your valiant attempt, I think, to convince us that the Department has done everything that it can by process and by written word to keep this problem outside the gates of Rathgale, I think it is clear from the way in which this has been implemented that it is, despite what others may see, it is a total and absolute shambles as to how a process could and was handled. And let me go right back, because I want to get to the nub of this, and I have a number of things that I want to pursue with you today. And Trevor, we're glad that Trevor's here in terms of the budgetary process. In a letter that the Minister has sent to us, he tells us that there was a budget settlement for 11-15. As a result of that budget settlement, we had 950 teachers took redundancy at a cost of £58 million. So that's the figures, and Laverne has rehearsed them to us today. Given that we are still in that budget period in terms of this process, without looking at what is in 15-16, because we don't know, we have no budget for 15-16, did the department underestimate the number of people who would take redundancies? Because in this scheme, which was launched a good number of months ago, way back probably at the beginning of the year, in February, we were told that there was 166 applications at a cost of £6 million. That's teaching, excluding non-teaching. Now, is it the case that at that stage the department did know or did not know if it had sufficient money to cover those applications? Because that is crucial to understanding. Let's set aside the politics of this, and I think it's shameful anyway that any department would use teachers in a political poem in regards to their ideological position about welfare reform. I think that's shameful. Set that aside. That's a separate issue at the minute. But I want to get to the point. Did the department, or was the department confident that it had sufficient resources to initiate a process that would lead to applications for redundancies? Yes.
No,
yeah, and then I'll come back to other. I'll come back to other. But I just want to. That's where we need to start.
I think if I go back slightly in terms of time, the Minister announced on the 20th of February 2013 the results of his revaluation in terms of the budget, and he set the budget for voluntary severance in both 13-14 and 14-15 at £10 million. Now, that's the allocation, Chair, that we had last year, and that's the allocation that we have this year. So that was set in February 2013. Now, in terms of your answer as regards how much, or was there an underestimate? Well, I suppose we did try and look in terms of what allocations and what had gone before, but clearly, as Laverne has already said, in the 12-13 and 13-14 years, there's already been a considerable number. Now, the other variables, and this is, remember, back at February 2013, is A, how much is going to be offered, which at that point had not been agreed for this year. And secondly, it is a demand-led in terms of, this is, if you like, the schools are the people who are making these posts redundant. This is not a voluntary severance scheme. This is a strategic cost reduction scheme there to balance the books. And I think that is a fundamental point because, in essence, there's, to me, and sorry to correct me here, but there's 2 points. One, the school assesses its financial position. The school decides in terms of what posts it needs to make redundant. And then, as a separate process, there are the volunteers to fill those posts because, obviously, ideally, we do not want to have compulsory redundancies. But the actual starting point here is the school and the Board of Governors, quite rightly, managing their financial position and declaring that they want to make a post redundant.
Yeah, but Trevor, this process was initiated by the department. This was a department-initiated process, and there is an attempt being made by the department to shift the blame to managing authorities and the Board of Governors of schools. And what is really disconcerting about this is, I can accept that an organisation such as complex as the department has to plan. Now, forgive me if I'm so fundamentally mistaken here, but on the previous history of the redundancy packages which had been approved, the 950 and the 58 million, you would make an assumption that there would be a number, X number of teachers who would be available. Surely you would go back out to your managing authorities, who would then go back out to their schools. They know best, the schools and the managing authority, the financial and the dire situation that many of them are in. They sit down, they have a conversation, and they're able to go back to the department and say, we believe that on the basis of what we have done from our board area, take my own board area, North Eastern Education Library Board area, we would have 40 people who we believe would like to get out. Now, is that making it too simple to determine then on the basis of how you fund a process? And the department says, well, actually, we only have money for 29, so you're going to have to... Laverne, explain to me in layman's terms how that would be fundamentally wrong, because it sounds like logic.
Well, no, the issue is that this is not a voluntary severance scheme. So it's not about people putting their hands up and saying, we would like to avail of a voluntary severance. As Trevor said, it's the schools identifying that in order for them to live within budget, they must make redundancies. They must lose posts. And therefore, they declare a redundancy. The process is such that to avoid a compulsory redundancy, volunteers are asked to come forward at that point. And if that can be facilitated from within that school, then that will be done. But we go further in education, and the Education Library Boards and CCMS and the Voluntary Grammar Schools, GMI, work together on a transfer redundancy scheme where people can put their name forward if they're interested in accessing a redundancy, and I think we're looking at 436 on the transfer redundancy applications at present. That then gets married up with the number of genuine cost reduction redundancies that have been identified, and for this year the number of applications totalled 167. Absolutely, Chair, in relation to a strategic approach to enabling schools to live within their budget, the Minister set aside huge amounts in the last number of years, and we have seen almost 1,000 teaching posts gone from the education sector. That isn't what we want. We don't want to see posts going. We would rather retain those posts and therefore use the education budget to improve the outcomes for young people and the quality of our teaching workforce. Given that there were almost 1,000 posts gone in the last number of years, our estimations were that the number of redundancies for this year would be much reduced. And so we were looking at a figure of around 200 teaching posts. So that would have been our figure for estimation. But as Trevor says, that's something that is very difficult to do at the centre, because each and every school is an organisation in their own right and make their own decisions regarding their budget.
But surely in the light of all of that, you still come to the point where on the previous record of the department in relation to, and let's not get hung up on the technical, what it is you call it, whether it's a voluntary redundancy or a strategic planning scheme or whatever it is we call it. As far as the teacher is concerned, it is about getting them moved from where they are out of the system, right? And managing the process, because I want to come on to that in a minute.
Sorry, Chair, because I think that actually is a completely fundamental. There's a massive difference between somebody volunteering with an expectation that if I volunteer I will be approved, and having a cost reduction programme which has 4 criteria, which if you do not meet the criteria, the funding will not be available to the school.
Right. Well, if I accept that point then, Trevor, that brings me on to my second point. If we accept all of that, even though I don't, but if we did, and there's a difference, okay, then why do I have a teacher who tells me, and it seems as though, and I've spoken to a considerable number of these, who received, and it seems as though they all received their letters on the same day, okay, the 7th of April. So they all receive a letter on the 7th of April telling them you've been successful. Caveats, yes, there's more caveats in it than you would in an insurance policy, right? Because, and that's understandable, because circumstances can change. But these people did, and there's a letter here from a teacher who made all sorts of arrangements and plans, and many others. Schools that have changed timetables, schools that have changed rooms. I have one teacher who has no room to go back to in September, and there's little, the fact that if there's a budget to pay him, it'll be something unusual. Now, here we have a letter of the 7th of April. It took the department 74 days to the 20th of June to discover, oh dear, there's no money in the pot. And the rumours started that there was an issue. And then we had the announcement on Monday. The department wasn't going to be able to fund these. Then we had a crisis on Tuesday. What was going on from the 7th of April to the 20th of June, 74 days later, that resulted in the bombshell being landed with these teachers, and they were saying, sorry, you're not able to go now?
Certainly, Chair, in relation to the commissioning note that issued in February, the 10th of February 2014, employing authorities were advised that they should issue their protected notification to individuals so that they would be given their 4 months contractual notice. So as far as the 7th of April is concerned, that must have been the date that that particular employing authority issued their letter. Certainly our guidance indicated that it should be done in advance of the 30th of April, where possible. The applications came in during the month of April, and the month of May the department assessed the applications against the criteria. The initial assessment and the outcome of that in relation to those that were deemed not to meet the criteria were communicated to the funding authorities and to CCMS on the 28th of May 2014. So that was the first notification that issued from the department to the funding authorities and CCMS, indicating that the applications were being assessed and that these that were in this letter of the 28th of May were identified at that point as not meeting the criteria. And at that point, the funding authorities and CCMS were invited to supply any further documentary evidence that they believed supported the application. We actually said in the letter, if you feel that the application of the criteria has been incorrect, we're inviting you to offer further documentary.
Okay. Did the department on the 28th of May, so we get our sequencing right here, did they know how many were ineligible in terms of the overall number of applications?
And that was what the communication on the 20th of May was.
So then why? So then the question is, and I may be running into a trap set by the department here, but I'll try and very quickly get out of it. Why then would a managing authority have sent out a letter of confirmation to a person on the 7th of April saying, all systems go, you're able to proceed?
It is.
So why would that be the case?
It's a contractual obligation that teachers will be given 4 months' notice, particularly over the summer period. The contract actually says 3 months' notice, but over the summer period, because of the July and August, they're entitled to 4 months' notification. That's why the 30th of April date is critical. But it is, as you said, Chair, yourself, heavily caveated in relation to circumstances can change right up to the 31st of August each year, that it is subject to departmental approval. Now, that is what the correspondence would have said, and it was a contractual obligation on the part of the employing authorities to issue their letters.
And I have a teacher who yesterday received a letter from Pensions Branch, which is within the department, based in Londonderry, saying, your pension's sorted. Have all your pension arrangements in place? A few days before that, he got a letter saying, your redundancies, it's on hold, nothing we can do, blah, 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 dear John letter. Like, you know, how much under control is the department in this issue? Because it seems as though there's an attempt to blame the board, and it's all disjointed. And the more I hear, the more I am convinced that the department couldn't draw a straight line on this issue, because it seems as though they set a date, contractual obligations, as the 30th of May. So 2 days before that, they send out a letter, which is the 28th. The boards might have a different date, which is contractual, to meet their contractual obligation. So they go for a date which is the 7th of April, which is way before the contractual date? Is there no joined-up approach or thinking on this issue at all?
The contractual date is the 30th of April, that the notification, protected notification has to be issued by the 30th of April.
Right, okay.
In relation to redundancy and in relation to retirement, they are two separate processes. Not all teachers who will be made redundant on the 31st of August will wish to access their pension. There will be, obviously, a number of teachers who will be made redundant who will wish to access their pension, but they are two separate processes. We certainly have had queries, Chair, from individuals and their unions clarifying, I only wanted to access my pension if I was going to receive a redundancy payment. Now that I know that I'm not going to be receiving a redundancy payment, I have to think again about whether I wish to access my pension. And we have given advice to say that up until the 15th of August, individuals can effectively rescind their request to access their pension.
Okay. Just two final questions, then we're going to go to members. First of all, is the total number going now, is it definitively 76?
It is.
Of the 166 applications for teaching staff?
It is.
The remaining
167.
167, right? The remaining 91
Yes,
are still under consideration,
they are.
subject to additional monies becoming available.
Yes.
Right. That brings me, and Trevor knows where I'm going to go. Let's go back to the contingency fund, okay? Better known as the slush fund. The department has creamed off £29 million, which has left boards, education library boards, sitting today, I understand, at the same point where the resource allocation hasn't been signed off.
No.
Have they now been signed off?
Well, the allocation letters went out on the 18th of April.
But have they been approved, and does everybody know their...
Oh, the resource allocation plans, no.
No, right, so they don't know their budget. But what they do know is that £29 million was top slice.
Sorry, they do know their budget.
Yeah.
It's how they're spending their budget. That's
Yes,
what the allocation
yes, right, okay. But £29 million was taken off the 5 boards and set aside.
No.
Well, where did the £29 million come from?
Well, as I said when we were up at Greenmount, I think it was in the end of
Yes.
May, the elements, the 29 million was made up of 3 key elements: the opening contingency fund of 9 million, the severance fund of 10 million, and then we proactively reduced budgets to put the other 10 million. That's the 29. Yes. But there was no reduction to either the ELB block grant or the ASB from what the Minister had announced the previous year. So absolutely there was no reduction to the block grant or earmarked funding to the boards. So there has been no reduction to the board.
Okay. But you still had a contingency fund of £9 million. You still had a redundancy package of £10 million, which is
as announced,
10
yes.
10 and 9 is £19 million.
Yes.
Was that insufficient to cover the 166 applications? Because from my, and I wasn't, people see from the newspaper, yes, I wasn't that bright when I was at school, but I do know that £19 million is more than £6 million, which we were told of the 166 applications was sufficient to cover that amount of money. So why, and this is why I want to get to, Trevor, why had the department not within its own resources, as already even indicated, even if you set aside where it came from, they had £19 million sitting there. I have a letter which says there was 166 applications equating to nearly £7 million. Why were they not able to be funded?
Well, Chair, if I refer you to the Minister's letter in response this morning, the Minister has reacted sensibly to political statements that there may be a 1.5% cut to departmental budgets by taking measures to set aside £29 million of funding in the event that the Executive does not agree that welfare reform will go ahead. As he states in his letter, that position has not changed. So that's what that £29 million is sitting there for. However, the Minister is very clear that this prudent financial management is not the same thing as him saying that he has agreed to any such cut to the budget. That's for the Executive to decide, and to date no decision has been made.
Well, Trevor, and I know you're only the messenger, but take the message back to the Minister. I do not accept, nor do I welcome, him using teachers in a political game around him trying to salve his conscience about not making cuts. This is affecting people's lives. This is the same minister who's telling us that he doesn't want to affect people's lives, that he wants to ensure that money is going to the vulnerable and to people who are in need. These people have contractual obligations. Legally, they entered into a process. They did everything that was asked of them. And now the minister's saying, I have money, but I'm holding on to the money because at some point in time, I'm going to have to pay the fines because I can't agree to something that was happening in London, even though they give us £10 billion subvention every year to keep Northern Ireland running. He's entering into a political realm, and I think that's shameful. I'm not going to pursue it any more. I'll come back to a few other questions because I want to go to members, but I want you to convey back to the Minister the message that it is totally unacceptable to use teachers in this way. There's money in the kitty that could resolve this issue. We've identified it, and I think that it's time that was done to get this problem resolved to the benefit of teachers. Well, not only of teachers, because sometimes people think, you know, oh, all you're doing here is defending teachers. There are schools going to go under financially as a result of this. I have a school in my constituency who a week ago was told by the board, if you don't let that teacher away, you're going into deficit. Teachers now not going because of the scheme. The board now has come back and said, oh no, we'll not be in deficit now. What sort of a way is that to treat a school? I think that brings on to that next point, but we'll come back to that later. I want to go to members. Danny.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. And Trevor, thank you. Like everyone else, we talked to the various teachers here, and we seem to have had. You were very clear on the guidelines and the reasons why things weren't going to happen. That doesn't seem to have fed all its way down to the bottom. Now, if you go Minister, Department, Funding Authority, Library Board, Schools, the steps this is moving down is like Chinese whispers. In one case, the teacher is telling me that their governors checked and double-checked that it was going to happen. So what I'm really coming back to is the Chinese whispers effect may seem clear at your end. It doesn't seem to have got clear to the other end, and therefore I think I agree with the Chair, but I think we're on a bound to be looking at how can we help those teachers and those schools, and I hope that when you're looking at that over the next few months, I certainly feel they have the impression that they're going to be made redundant, and they need to know that it's not just their lives and the schools. When do you think you've had the chance to get through, I can't remember what the numbers are.
91.
The 91. When do you think you can give them clarity? Because they're on holiday now and they deserve their holidays and their breaks. They need to know.
You know, I think it's absolutely evident that the whole issue of managing expectations from the reaction in relation to the decisions and the announcement and so forth is that whilst we had, as the Chair said, caveats in letters to individuals, assurance statements where boards of governors, etc. were signing, making sure that that gets to the individuals involved and what that actually means. So certainly that is something that we will work with the employing authorities, the funding authorities, with the trade unions in relation to ensuring that the message is this is not a voluntary severance package. This is a strategic cost reduction exercise. We would wish to not see teaching posts leaving the sector. We would wish to retain them, but in an attempt to help schools live within their budgets, this is a hard decision that has to be taken, recognising that we still have more volunteers, 436, than actual bona fide redundancies. So given the number of questions that we've had as a department, the ministers had through correspondence and so forth, is indicative of the fact that people are not understanding the difference in those terminologies and those processes. So we will work, as I say, with all those involved to ensure that that is clearer.
A timescale?
Your specific question regarding the 91 applications, last week when the Minister spoke to the Assembly, he indicated that having gone through that, and we are going through that process of assessment again, there are applications in there that do not meet all 4 criteria. Specifically, the reduction to full-time equivalent. So we have applications from a school that is saying we want to make 3 posts redundant, but we wish to retain 1 post, or wish to retain 2 posts. That does not meet the 3rd criteria. And that was what the Minister said last week, that even through further assessment, there will be, within that cohort of 91, a number of applications that just do not meet the criteria as far as full-time equivalent reduction is concerned. And again, about communication, this is a cost reduction exercise. We absolutely accept that some schools' applications are saying we need to change for a curricular reason. We need to move from having a history teacher to someone who can teach history and geography, for example. So they wish to change their complement of staff, their teaching complement, but they don't wish to reduce their teaching numbers.
To those interpretations, or are you willing, where you find that people have been, if I could put it, when we led out the garden path, and they thought that, are you going to look through and give everyone their chance rather than just say, I'm sorry, these 5 don't fit, you're not getting redundant? Are you going to look at to see where the information systems went wrong and then honour what they thought they were signing into?
We absolutely are looking at all of the criteria again. But the one that is the driver in this is the managing within a challenging financial position. Therefore, we have had to prioritise based on relative need. So within those 91 applications, there will be schools that are projecting into 2016, 2017, that if they don't make the reductions, that they could go into deficit. We've had to prioritise those that are currently, or as it is in March 2014, already in a position where their budget was already hitting the -5 deficit, or 75k, whichever is the greatest. So of the 91, there may be some in there that would qualify for the criteria for looking at the managing within a challenging financial position, projecting forward, let's say, to March 15. But within those 91, there are other applications which do not meet the 3rd criteria around reduction in FTE. And if the schools wish to make a reduction for curricular reasons, this money was never set aside for that purpose.
And sorry, Deputy Chair, I wanted to let Laverne do the process, but I think from a financial perspective, and no, we'll come back, this is strategic cost reduction. We have a stewardship function in terms of public funds. We are paying out redundancy to people so that the cost base of that particular school reduces, so that school can live within its budget. Doing a curriculum change and effectively having exactly the same number of teachers in September that you started in June, but paying out redundancy in between, does not address the budget. And I know, Chair, and it's a very heartfelt comment, the Board of Governors, if all you do is move the teachers, you may, in theory, have a slight reduction depending on the relative experience of the 2 teachers. That may be the case, it may not. But that is not going to reduce strategically the cost of that school, the cost base, and reduce their deficit. And that's what this is about. Sorry, Deputy, but the whole part of these criteria is that you must meet the criteria in terms of reduction in FTE. That produces a payback. And you must have a challenging financial position. You must comply with the criteria. And I think it's back to the expectation. It's not about I volunteer. There's 430 volunteers. There's only 167 posts being put forward by schools. So immediately you're on a 1-to-3 ratio that I have volunteered and I am not getting. It is not a voluntary separate programme. The initiating point is the school declaring that they have decided that due to their financial position, they are having to make the very difficult and challenging decision to make a post redundant.
So you're going to rigidly stick to the criteria?
We're going to rigidly stick to the criteria. The issue around managing in a challenging financial position, as I said, we've had to prioritise those that are currently in that position. I have no doubt through looking at the applications that there will be a number within the applications that are projecting into the future, and therefore if further funding became available, they would be the next group of prioritised.
And once again, that's what we do, Chair, as you well know. We have to prioritise our funds. We have competing priorities. We've put 6 bids in for £50 million, SEN and severance being the first two, school maintenance, etc., etc. So we must prioritise the funding in terms of to address those schools in the most immediate need, and on that basis, those are schools who were ending the previous financial year already in a deficit position.
And timescale, how soon do you think you can get?
I think it is absolutely necessary that particularly those that are not meeting that specific criteria around the reduction in FTE, that is absolutely made clear that they will not meet the criteria. So even if there was additional funding, they would not be approved. And I think that's absolutely required as quickly as we possibly can. Absolutely. Completely agree with that. As for those that are projecting a deficit situation, that would be dependent on additional funding. And again, I'm conscious that for those individuals can leave them in a limbo position, but I think the sooner that we can make it absolutely clear for those that are not going to be approved regardless of the funding situation, we do that first, and then we look at what is left that's meeting the criteria.
I hope you're going to find the funds, and I hope you're going to find a way of bending it, because there are a lot of people out there. The Chinese Whispers has, and you then need to review the whole system. So even if you're putting a statutory letter out, contract, it does not leave them feeling that, oh, I'm going to be made redundant, despite a paragraph or two at the bottom of why they might not get it. Will you review the whole system? So
very much so. As I said, I would deem that as managing expectations, and evidently people's expectations were not being effectively managed through this process. So we will absolutely look at what we can do to improve that.
I'm afraid I have to go off to another meeting. Thank you.
Trevor? Thank you.
The 91 who may not be approved now, what I'm wondering is at what point in this whole cycle will you actually establish whether they're going to be approved or not? Because on the outcome that decision hasn't already been made. This is the 1st of July. So
the communication of the 28th of May to the funding authorities and CCMS listed those 91 applications that were deemed not to meet the criteria.
Or may not meet the criteria.
Well, that's how they were assessed by the department, that they were deemed not to meet the criteria. And on the 28th of May, the funding authorities and CCMS were invited to produce further documentary evidence if they felt that the department had assessed the application incorrectly. And they all did submit further information, which was then scrutinised during the beginning of June. So that's the time scale. So those letters on the 20th of May and then followed up by the 20th of June letters indicated which applications were deemed not to meet the criteria and the reason for them being deemed not to meet the criteria.
You've got a letter on the 20th of May which said these people don't meet the criteria, but you can come back by the 2nd of June, which is 5 days later.
That's right.
If you want to provide supporting evidence that they might meet the criteria after all, and 16 days after that, you write out again and say, no, they don't meet the criteria. So what are we now talking about? That there's 91 that are still under consideration? That's twice you've told them they don't meet the criteria.
The 91 we've communicated to the funding authorities and CCMS that the 91 have not been deemed to meet the criteria. When the Minister was talking at the Assembly last week, he indicated that we would look again at those 91 to ensure that there weren't any in there that could be deemed to meet the criteria if further funding became available.
Yeah, well, that's where I was going with this, because is it really a case that these people don't meet the criteria, or probably don't meet the criteria, or is it really the case that they don't meet the criteria because there isn't the money to pay for their redundancy? in fact, they do meet the criteria, but there isn't enough funding.
Well, certainly, as indicated to Danny Kinnan in relation to his question around the 91, how many of those would be deemed to meet the criteria? There are a considerable number of those do not meet the full-time equivalent reduction criteria, and that's the issue about giving them absolute clarity that they will not be approved even if funding was to become available.
Is there cases out there where the school has been effectively told, yes, these redundancies are approved, but have then subsequently been told, well, yes, they've been approved, but we can't finance them?
No, that situation hasn't happened. The initial notification on the Minister's decision on the 20th of June indicated that the 46 applications that were redundant posts as a result of school closures and amalgamations were the only ones approved at that stage. The other 30 were deemed to meet the criteria at that stage, but were not approved due to unavailability of funding at that stage.
Okay. So if, and the, what's now going to be the July monitoring round, if he gets this 10 million extra for severance, is that going to solve the problem? And of the ones who are legitimately entitled to what they were expecting anyway, and what they had certainly been led to believe they were getting?
The answer would be yes, but I just want to be clear that the 10 million is for all severance. It's for school, teaching and non-teaching and non-school based drivers. So it covers a bid for all severance in terms of across the sector.
And I know you wouldn't want to talk about individual schools. You know, we've all had our conversation with school experience here, and I'm looking at one which absolutely thought that they had qualified in terms of the 4 criteria, and they wanted to let 4 teaching staff go, and were quite certain that they would be allowed to. I mean, what you're saying is that school has effectively jumped the gun by confirming to these people that they will be allowed to go as from the end of August.
It's back to the question that the Chair had raised around the notification and the letters that issued, and the copy that the Chair has is dated the 7th of April. The notification that went out from the Department was that the notification should issue by the 30th of April, but that would be caveated on it being approved by the Department. So I wouldn't say the schools have jumped the gun, I wouldn't use that terminology. It's the issue around what was in the letter and how clear it was to the individuals that all of this was subject to departmental approval.
Is the main criteria that is causing the problem that the school has to qualify in terms of already trying to manage a difficult financial situation? Is that the main one?
Yes.
Because this particular school, which I'm not naming, qualifies A1 in that respect.
That's right. Now, I would say to me there's 2 equal criteria. 1, yes, the school must be in a challenging financial position, but 2, there must be the reduction in FTE, because it comes back to the point. Otherwise, if you think of it from if I like a financial perspective, we're paying redundancy. A teacher is then recruited, and the school starts the next academic year with exactly the same teaching complement and has not made any cost reduction.
I know we've got that message now. Frankly, would agree with you that if that's what schools are doing, they don't qualify for this particular scheme. That's fair enough. The school I'm thinking of, they do qualify. They're putting forward through a straightforward reduction of 4 in their complement of teaching staff, including the vice principal. They're in a challenging financial position, and that their bank would like to talk to them at the moment. They're not maintained and integrated. And that there is no question of threat of what's the other 2. They are bona fide redundancies. The posts are not being refilled at a later stage, and I presume the payback period okay. So, and yet here we are with what appears to me to be a absolute bona fide case. I cannot think of the only criterion that matters here is the fact that the department has run out of money.
Well, certainly, Chair, if there's a specific question, we'd be happy to take the information and correspond with you directly on a specific matter. No difficulty with that at all, Chair.
Could I follow up on that question? I think it's probably the same school, and they may not at the minute be in financial difficulty, but if they have to retain their 4 teachers, by the end of next year they're going to be 200 grand in the red.
That's right.
So where does that fit in?
From the description,
They're already in, that's the same school, just like I know they've been talking about, and they're already in deficit to the tune of 6 figures.
I can't talk about the specific case.
No, I'm
but
not expecting
from
you to.
From what you've both said, it may be that they're not currently, and you said maybe they're projecting into next year as opposed to currently, and that would be within the 91, those that would be projecting for March 2015, and so they're the ones that we're specifically focusing in on at this stage.
Right.
Okay, but that does, because that was one of the points before we were shown, and and then we'll maybe come back to this, but they're not the only school in that position. I have a school in my constituency. I sat down with the board, said, this is what we're going to do, and this will help us, and it fits. It is, a strategic cost reduction exercise. Now they're told, sorry, can't go. School now in a position where next year they're in financial deficit. Now, how is that good financial management? It's a disaster.
Well, the Minister has said of those 91 applications...
Yeah, but the Minister said...
Again.
Yeah, but in fairness to the Minister has even admitted that that is the case. In the radio interview in Radio Ulster, when he was asked, in terms of this issue, about schools, is it a false... And James McKee asked him about it being a false economy if a teacher's now being kept on, that was due to get the redundancy, will it push the school's budget into the red? Answer. It will without doubt do that, and we will, as you have said, creating a false economy and putting our schools under further pressure, and we don't want to be in that scenario. This is very, very serious. It's not just about, that's what I said earlier on, and I have full sympathy with the teachers. I'm trying to be as compassionate in terms of this issue and not in any way be belittling the seriousness of this issue, but it's also the consequences if we don't have a resolution to whether they go or whether they stay, because there are schools who will ultimately end up in a very dire financial position, which is not good, and will leave Trevor with a bigger headache, probably bigger than the headache that currently is pending if we don't have some parties face up to the reality in relation to welfare reform. That's a political decision I don't want to get involved in this committee, but we're interested in the schools. Sean?
Thanks. You're very welcome. And I say it. I don't know if you realise the turmoil this has created individuals into schools. We've all had our calls during the week of the teacher who spent 35 years and school functions organised for last Thursday night and cancelled, parents bringing in presents, etc., and the trauma that associated. Now they don't know whether they're going or coming. Or the problem from a school management point of view, particularly in a number of post-primary schools where they were losing a significant number of staff, and when their curriculum planning swung into operation after the 7th of April, and how they have tried to plan for September, redesignation of posts, changing teaching around and all those sort of things, because there were X number of staff less, to not know where they're actually at. So it's an awful situation. The letter went out on the 7th of April was more or less, I'm sure, the same letter that's gone out year on year, and that same type of letter. And Laverne, when you talked about criteria, it's very hard for the ordinary person to understand how 46 people met the criteria this week, but when it become Thursday week or whatever, 76 people met the criteria. And you're saying today that the remaining 81, that any of them meet the criteria, they'll be dealt with as well. I think it's so difficult for people to understand that. And I suppose just before I move on, I'll just let you deal with the criteria. The last point on the criteria is, if out of those 91, when that letter went out to the applying authorities, if there was people who were certainly not meeting the criteria, why did schools not be informed of that at that stage? That would actually have helped maybe to reduce some of the problems. No.
Well, certainly in relation to the specifics around the criteria that was applied, the notification stated that all 4 criteria had to be met. So there are a number of the 91 that are not meeting the criteria because of they're not reducing their full-time equivalent, and that therefore they're counted out because they don't meet that 3rd criteria. Now, that was communicated on the 20th of May to the funding authorities and employing authorities, CCMS, and they were given an opportunity to come back with any further information in that regard. So at that stage, I don't believe, now John's here from an employing authority and funding authority, I don't believe they did communicate directly with schools at that stage because they were still supplying further information for consideration. But when the letters then issued on the 20th of June, indicating the Minister's decision regarding funding, the 46 were those in relation to schools who had post-redundant as a result of a closure or amalgamation. The other 30 were identified as having met the criteria but not approved at this stage due to unavailability of funding. So that's when, obviously, when the Minister engaged with the Assembly and he made a commitment to look again at his budget to see if he could identify any further funding from within his budget. And it was at that point that those 30 were able to be funded. So they were deemed that they met the criteria when the letter of the 20th of June issued, but were not approved at that stage due to unavailability of funding. That still left the cohort of 91. And again, the Minister has said he wants us to look again at those 91 to see which, if any, could be approved. Looking not at those schools who are currently in a deficit of -5% or 75,000, but projecting into March 15, and that he would wish, if further funding became available, to prioritise those applications. The discussion today is very clear that those who do not meet the 3rd criteria, specifically around the FTE reduction, so they may meet the 4th criteria of managing in a challenging financial position, but are not meeting the 3rd criteria, it would be best to absolutely underscore those and say they will not be approved, even if further funding became available. That would leave us with a smaller number who meet all 4 criteria, including projecting a deficit into March 15. That could be then looked at if further funding became available.
But, Laverne, why was that not done earlier?
It took the month of May to assess the applications against the criteria. And as soon as that was complete, in fact, it wasn't completed, it was still we were still looking at applications, but we had been able to identify those that were deemed not to meet the criteria, and that was the 20th of May correspondence. So as soon as we identified those that were deemed not to meet the criteria, we issued correspondence to the funding authorities and CCMS.
Yeah, and I'm sure the funding authorities dealt with that as they did in previous years. But since the department understood the situation, they were in such a dire situation, it would have been helpful if that had been communicated, or had instructed the funding authorities to communicate that to schools, that certain people weren't going to meet the criteria. It would have reduced the stress in some situations.
It is apparent that, as I said, the issue of managing expectations about what was going to be possible to be approved and what wasn't, regardless almost in that sense of the funding availability.
And Trevor, there's 29 million, we're in a very, very stressful situation with our staff, our teachers and so on, whatever, but there's other people in that 2091 that meet this criteria. Would the sensible thing not to be that money is moved out of that contingency fund into this, and then bid in the June monitoring round, rather than bid in the June monitoring round for 10 million for severance, that 10 million is taken out of the contingency fund and bid in the June monitoring round to put that back in again? Would that not help to alleviate that, reduce a little bit of the stress out there?
Sorry, just give me that last wee bit again. Sorry, Sean, in terms of the...
Yeah, you know, there's 20, as far as I know, there's 29 million in the contingency fund. Could 10 million not be taken out of that contingency fund and put into teacher severance? And the Minister bid for 10 million in the June monitoring round or the July monitoring round to reinstate this contingency fund.
Well, in essence, that's what he has done. He has made a bid for 10 million in June monitoring for severance. The two priority bids that we have put are, in terms of prioritisation, is SEN is 10 million and the second priority is severance, and then school surplus 5 million. So those are the prioritisation. So he has already bid for the 10 million. In terms of the decision as regards the 29 million, the Minister made his decision and is sticking with that decision that he is keeping the 29 million as set aside for the welfare reform. But we have already made a bid for the 10 million. We did that and we notified the committee way back on the 4th of June. So we were aware of the issue in terms of the fact that, as I said at Greenmount, that we had the 10 million allocation that the Minister put in place way back in February 2013 for 14-15. That's now sitting as part of the 29 million for welfare reform, and that's why we bid for the 10 million for severance.
See, I think people can't understand that, because there's money in the contingency fund that could help alleviate the problem of severance if that money is just shifted now and then deal with the unknowns of welfare reform and so on later.
Well, I think it's, well, the issue is that the later, depending on what decision the executive could make, the later could be, well, it will be, I presume, the 8th of July is the next executive meeting. It could have been the 19th of June. So depending on what outcome, the decision that executive could make, the amount of money that could potentially come out of our baseline would have happened effectively, you know, within a very short time thereafter. So it's not about that this is going to happen sometime. If the executive agree that there is a top slicing, that money will be leaving our baseline very shortly afterwards. So we don't have a lot of time delay between the executive reaching that decision and the money leaving our baseline.
Well then, what would you say to schools who are in this situation if we're, say, 3 or 4 teachers going to post-primary school? They have their curriculum plan based for next year on having those teachers less or whatever. What do you say to them? Do you say to hold on, to halt, and do nothing until we see how this pans out over this next week or two, or month?
Well, I suppose, and Laurent can talk about, to me, we keep coming back to the key point. This is a strategic cost reduction programme in terms of meeting the criteria. If they have met the criteria, as far as I'm aware, the 76 posts, the 46 for schools closures and amalgamations, and the further 30, they are all of the posts that have met the criteria. So all the posts that have currently met the criteria have been funded. It's the 91 and the further scrutiny is to establish, is there any further information that we can establish from the schools? But and as Laverne alluded, on the 20th of May and to date, that process is still ongoing, but they still not have passed the criteria. We're still in an iterative process with the schools and the employing authorities to establish that.
I hope you get from compliments, a bit like the AWP used 2 years ago coming up to Christmas, where they were significantly reduced, and then principals then were tearing their hair out to try and make the thing meet up again, and then they were increased suddenly again. You know, the stress out there at the minute, you know, if you were able to switch that 10 million from the contingency fund into teacher severance now and then, but I think would help to alleviate the situation. But, thanks, Chair.
Trevor, you wanted to come in and just a quick point now to
just on the definition of financial stress, is that what I would call it? Laverne, you said it's either 5% of budget or £75,000, not right? So if a school, well, what you're saying now for these 91 is that if a school, that says, run the deficit of about 50 grand, but the redundancy will put them into a situation of being over 75, that they may be reconsidered.
It's those that are projecting, so those that of the 30 are already in a challenging financial position.
The particular school that Pat and I are alluding to is already above the 75,000 threshold. But I really think we need to have a conversation.
Yes. It may be one of the other criteria, Trevor, that is not.
First of all, I'm sure you'll agree this isn't the most serious issue that's faced education over the past number of years. I understand the sort of turmoil it has created for the individual teachers. But, you know, at the end of the day, if the headlines in the telly were Minister refuses to make teachers redundant, I don't think that people would be running out on the streets to protest about it. But just for clarity, because at the end of the day, somebody's going to get the blame here. You know, the finger's going to be pointed at someone because expectations haven't been managed. And I understand this isn't a voluntary severance scheme, that it's a cost reduction exercise. And, you know, I presume what happened was that the department made it known to schools that they were going to make so many reductions, or they wanted to make so many redundancies, sorry. The schools then came along and said, well, I want to make 4 redundant, or I want to make 2, or whatever. And then, you know, they communicated with the department or with the board.
Sorry, but just one. In our communication, we set up the scheme, but it's the Board of Governors who decide. So there was no sort of number or, you know, expectation in terms of simply other than it's here is a scheme to facilitate you, Board of Governors, to reduce your cost base. Okay. Here is a set of criteria you must meet. If you meet that, we will fund that redundancy. But it's just the decision point is always with the Board of Governors initially.
Yeah, no problem. And then presumably the Board of Governors, probably through the principal, would have spoken to the staff, made them aware of the scheme, and then members of staff would have come forward. And the difficulty here is that expectations weren't managed. So, I mean, you're clear, Laverne, that the department lived up to its responsibilities in terms of, you know, not making false promises to anyone. The letters that went out were clear. So it therefore must either have been the boards of governors of schools, or perhaps the principals, or perhaps the teachers themselves who didn't understand what was involved here.
Yeah, I think the issue is that certainly from the presentation earlier and the timeline and the correspondence and the communication, certainly we feel that we did take the relevant and appropriate steps. I think from the reaction to the process that we've found ourselves in the last couple of weeks, clearly says that individuals involved were not fully aware of the implications. So we can absolutely learn from that process, and as I said, work with the employing authorities, work with the funding authorities, work with the trade unions to say, how can we get the culture of a voluntary severance package, I put my hand up, I'd like to leave and I'll access the funding, that is not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a very different process, which is to enable schools to live within budget. And yes, absolutely, where we can get volunteers to come forward and take those compulsory redundant posts, that is a much better position for employers to be in. But it is getting that change in understanding that it's not about someone volunteering to go and therefore their expectations being built up to say, I can now leave with my redundancy package and with my retirement. That obviously did not get through to the individuals involved, or they, you know, that we wouldn't have had the reaction that we had. So yes, we have the documentation. I've taken you through the timeline and the correspondence. But the key here is that we can absolutely learn in future to manage the expectations of the individuals who are impacted by this.
Yeah, okay. That's all I wanted to.
Okay, I just want to clarify a few things. And I have to say, if any teacher or school who applied to this process was listening, I think they would find it very humiliating to be told that they didn't understand, that they weren't managing the expectations, and somehow they weren't up for understanding the process. I want to ask a question before I go on to say something else. Have we had in the past, prior to this, a strategic cost reduction exercise?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Was the criteria the same?
No.
When was the criteria changed for this exercise by the departments, not by the boards, not by the Board of Governors, not by the teachers, not by the caretaker, not by the cleaner? When was it initiated by the department? When was that conveyed either to us or to the managing authorities that there was a change in the criteria in relation to the strategic cost reduction exercise?
There has been a change year on year.
So there's never been the same?
No.
So, so we've had a number of strategic cost reduction exercises?
Yes, yes.
Have we ever had misunderstanding or a situation where there was a non-management of expectations in the past?
The issue is that every year we have learned from the year before, and we have developed our processes and developed the criteria against which applications would be assessed. And in the past, the applications that have been deemed to be approved have been funded. As we said, over the last 2 years, over 950 posts were made redundant at a cost of over 58 million.
Yeah, so in terms of those 950 and the 58, in that, was there people who were released under the strategic cost reduction exercise as opposed to a voluntary redundancy scheme?
They were all
strategic cost.
They're all
cost
strategic.
reduction. And they, at that
Right.
stage, the criteria would have been
Right.
the bona fide redundancy, the 2-year payback, and the reduction in the full-time
So are we, and I don't agree with this because I think it's terrible to make this assertion, but have we teachers now that are, who in this scheme were less capable of understanding this scheme than there was the previous scheme?
No, and
No.
please, Chair, that is
No, and I don't
certainly
think that.
not what I have said, and certainly not what I would wish to convey. It is a case that in the past the Minister has set aside substantial funding for redundancies to the point, as I've said, 58 million. This year the Minister set aside 10 million, and that was for teaching,
And
for
non-teaching,
non-teaching and headquarters. So that was made clear to all parties involved, funding authorities, CCMS, trade unions, correspondence in January, correspondence in February, to say that that was the effective funding for all redundancies.
Yes, but he still has another contingency fund with 9 million sitting in it. Correct?
Yes.
Yes.
That was our opening.
And he has
position.
made, and as Trevor has confirmed, he has made a decision that that is what he has done. So he has decided as Minister, there's a pot of money, I'm ring fencing, not good in with that, and then this crisis has subsequently flown from that.
But I think, Jared,
He's made a decision.
and just listen to Sean, we have inescapable bids for 50 million. So to sort of take the hypothetical in terms of taking money out of the 29, where do you prioritise special education needs against teacher severances?
Yeah, that's, but what you don't do, Trevor,
But
is,
sorry, Chair, but I think like it is, that is the nub of this in terms of you always have competing priorities. You always have a prioritisation decision to make, and our number one bid to June monitoring was to do with special education needs. That's the prioritisation we put on it. The second prioritisation was severance.
yeah, and maybe what you need to do is then not to have strategic cost reduction exercises, which is has been the norm up until now. And you don't make teachers redundant because it was the department who initiated this process. And if you initiate a process, you surely numeracy has not got to the extent where it's now reached the department, that you don't do the sums before you do the policy, even if it is on a guesstimate, even if it is on, as some of this is, I accept that. We end up in a situation where we have a policy and we do have money, but because of political decision the Minister has made, that money is not going to be used. But I want to get to John, because I want to ask John a question. And John has been very patient sitting there, and he probably had hoped that he had maybe missed. But I want to talk here about the managing authorities, CCMS and Education Library Board. Do you accept, John, the assertion that's being made by the department that there was a misunderstanding of the process, that there wasn't maybe good management of the expectation in relation to this? Who was it that didn't understand this process that has led us to a place where there is nothing short of a shambles in regards to this exercise under a strategic cost reduction process?
Sorry, Chair, I just want to be clear, though, that I did not say that there's been a misunderstanding. We talked about the managing expectations of the individuals involved, and all of the notification that was received and issued was clear.
But
that
Laverne, there was a clear, in the timeline, it was quite clear what was being said. It shouldn't be the dates where we issued our letter on the 28th, and the date was the 30th of May, and there was even a reference to maybe somebody jumping the gun because a letter had been sent out on the 7th of April. So does someone who represents a managing authority accept that they misunderstood, that they jumped the gun, or that they didn't manage expectation as a representative of a managing authority?
I have listened very carefully to some of the points, and some of the points that Pat just indicated there. He was saying as if it was the department go out with a scheme and school simply bid for, we would like to let 4 teachers go. That's not how the process works. If, for example, a school has already identified that it is in financial difficulties, it would be having discussions with the finance authority within our board, and if it is deemed that they're going to have to declare a redundancy, that's what would trigger the process. So if that's going to trigger the process, they would know whether or not they anticipate they're going to need to let 1 or 2 teachers go to deal with the financial situation. It's not that they're putting in a bid for an amount of money. So if they're contacting the board, they start the process for a redundancy. And for the aspect then about whether it was communicated, we are dealing on a teacher-by-teacher basis whenever we're actually looking at the number of redundancies that are required, and we're doing everything we can to avoid a compulsory redundancy. That's why we instigate a transfer redundancy process to avoid the compulsories. So you'll have a number of volunteers that are coming forward, and it's already been indicated there were over 400 volunteers coming forward. Within our board area, we had anticipated 6 redundancies. We communicated directly with those 6 when we became aware of the fact of their redundancies that were being anticipated within any individual schools not being confirmed by the department because of the funding being made available. We do write out to individual schools, and we do write out to individuals because of the redundancy notice which is required if it is going to be 4 months to ensure that there isn't going to be any payment in lieu of notice. And any letters that would go out in April would indicate that. And I have an example of one in front of me. We sent it to a principal and we had on it, please note, no assurance should be given to teachers at school level that redundancy will be progressed until funding is approved by DE. And that'll be the same across all of the employing authorities. That information is built into that. The department were very clear that they wanted to make sure that we did incorporate that in, and we did. So we were in discussions with both principals, governors and individual teachers about the redundancies and whether or not they were going to be funded. Our priority was the ones that were identified as being compulsory redundant and that they had no post to move to. So, we were communicating throughout the whole process with all of the staff that were involved with that. It is changing situation because of the fact that we were right up until June before we knew the specifics of who was going to be released and who wasn't. And we're still in that situation because of the fact of we have a number of people here that are still under scrutiny, whether they meet the full-time equivalent or whether it is financial situation predicted forward until the 31st of March 2015, and that's the ones that we are concerned about, because if it's someone that's been approved to go, we know where we stand. In other situations, we have teachers coming back into schools. We don't know how we're going to deal with that, and they're the ones that we will be working directly with the department, because if we believe that they are facing a challenging situation either currently or to meet the criteria of the 5% deficit the 31st of March 2015, we will be trying all we can to make sure that they fall into that category. If the money's made available, those teachers will be released.
Trevor, you want to comment? And we have to conclude this, members, because I know members need to be in the House for question time. So.
Yeah, well, same here, Chair. But you made the point that people may not have understood the process. I mean, the department makes the point that you clearly understood the process. So could we get a look at all the correspondence here? But the letter of the 7th of April, has the letter gone to these 91? Are the schools, the authorities involved with these 91 recently to say that you're still not approved?
The letter of the 7th of April is an example of one employing authorities letter. I understand I haven't got that letter in front of me, and the other employing authorities may have issued at a different time or date, but that would have gone out before the 30th of April so that they were complying with the contractual notification period.
That's the one that was heavily caveated and all the rest of it.
Yes.
But there's been quite a wee flood of correspondence here over the last 3 or 4 months, and I think it would be worthwhile for us to get a look at it, Chairman, and see if we understand it, frankly.
Certainly.
Because, there's people out there who evidently haven't, intelligent people.
Okay, members, we are going to have to bring this to a conclusion because unfortunately members have to go to the House. But I know that there'll be a number. We'll resume this in the morning to finish our deliberations on it. But in the meantime, Trevor, Laverne, John, thank you very much for your attendance. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, members. Thank you.
29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29.